Thanks again, everyone, for joining and join today's workshop, which is a Build a Better Storefront session, where we are introducing a new Next.js Commerce template for Salesforce Commerce Cloud. So this is going to be us providing to you all some resources that we think will be great for you building great composable applications, but it's also going to be a great opportunity for us to just kind of talk about what it means to really build a strong web application for commerce. So for those of you that haven't met me, my name is Alex Hawley. I am the Senior Manager of Partner Solutions at Vercel. I work with basically all of Vercel's partners to make sure that we're building great solutions together for our joint customers. And I'm really lucky to be joined today by John Duncan, who is the CEO and co-founder of 64 Labs, which has done a ton of work with Vercel for several customers in the Salesforce ecosystem.
Hey, how's it going? Pleased to meet everybody.
So a couple of housekeeping items and an agenda before we get into the content. So what we're going to cover today are a couple different topics. First, John and I are really going to cover the what, the why, and the how of Next.js and Salesforce Commerce Cloud. We want to provide a good foundation of how we think about headless with Salesforce and the value that we think Next.js and Vercel can bring to your projects. And then I'm going to go through a walkthrough where I'm going to show you a new template that we have, which can act as a starting point or a reference for your applications. And then John and I are going to discuss how you can take this further and make it really specific for your business or for your clients. And then at the very end, we're going to have just a block of time dedicated for a Q&A. Though if you have comments or questions, I definitely encourage encourage you to not wait until the end. You can throw your questions into the Zoom chat, or if you have any comments as you go, also feel free to leverage the chat overall. John and I will keep an eye on it and make sure that you're brought into the discussion. So with that said, let me kick over to the main content that we have here today. Or sorry. So actually, before I do that, quick poll for you all. We are curious, what framework are you using right now for building your e-commerce apps? So obviously today we're talking about Next.js, but we know that PWA-Kit very prominent in this ecosystem, as well as I think many other front-end JavaScript frameworks or monolithic frameworks. So curious for everyone just to kind of vote on this poll, and we'll see where y'all land on this. John, I'm actually curious for your teams at 64 Labs, what has been the kind of like breakdown of frameworks that you're using there?
Well, I mean, to a degree, it depends on how far you go back. So I think we were one of Mobify's earliest front-end partners. So we've been building PWAs in some form or another for, crikey, it must be sort of 9 years now. I don't know if anybody remembers React Storefront. We built something in React Storefront once. That was some time ago. And I'd say, like, for Salesforce clients, there's been a surge of PWA kit builds. It depends a bit on the clients, but um, there's a lot of noise around. I mean, hence we're doing this. There's a lot of noise at the moment around Next and Vercel and sort of the opportunities to really kick on and front end. So I'd say that it's tilting. So we're getting much more conversations about Next now, but more PWA kit builds up to this point.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And looking at the poll results here, you can see that custom and PWA-Kit basically the majority, with Next.js taking up some. So hopefully this is the content today is a good kind of overview of maybe how you can pull Next.js into more of your apps. Although I will say, we're going to be talking about Vercel a lot. Vercel is not confined to just Next.js. If you have a custom JavaScript application, even if it's not Next, you could definitely bring it to Vercel and get some of the benefits out of our platform.
It's
Um,
it's it's been a conversation internally as to when you're going to do Svelte kit. We've been kind of looking forward to seeing that, but sadly
yeah,
not a topic of conversation today, I'm afraid.
yeah, but we can definitely do follow-ups on other framework supports. Svelte's a big one. Well, great. Thanks everyone for voting there. Let's talk a little bit now about what we're going to be covering, what the stack is that we're going to be giving you a reference for today. So what is Next.js and Salesforce and Next.js Commerce and Salesforce Commerce Cloud? So what this is a composable architecture with a modern React front end and a enterprise commerce backend, obviously Salesforce Commerce Cloud. So what this is going to provide to you is a front end that's going to be really great for performance because Next.js provides a bunch of functionality for you out of the box that you can begin to leverage for a really fast and also really dynamic application. So we'll touch on this in more detail, but there's things like automatic asset and image optimization built into Next.js, as well as support for a number of different rendering strategies and patterns that's going to make it easy to build, again, these dynamic storefronts where you're leveraging personalization or you're doing A/B testing, but you don't want to compromise on that page speed. And then if you choose to host on Vercel, and with Salesforce Commerce Cloud, you're going to have a global commerce solution that is scaled across the globe. Vercel, for example, has 18 regions across the globe that you can run compute in, but then over 120 points of presence across the globe. So those experiences for those users, regardless of where they are in the world, is going to be very fast. And then with a composable architecture and a solution like this, it's going to be very extensible. You're going to be able to tap into all the different areas of Salesforce's ecosystem, as well as if you have separate custom or proprietary backend data, services, all of that can be integrated with Next.js in an architecture like this, hopefully with a much smaller lift than you've seen before with other architectures. And then at the end, we'll go into a little bit more about how you can start kind of adopting AI. But a great thing about this stack that we're seeing a lot of adoption in is if you want to add AI or add some AI agentic workflows or commerce in general, this is a great stack to be. Next.js is a huge ecosystem. And if you are using cutting edge AI front end tools, Next.js and Vercel is definitely going to have you covered there. At a high level, why you might want to use this stack. So it's kind of broken down into these three bullets. So first, it's about performance and scale. Performance, really, really important in terms of generating conversions and revenue, as well as making sure that you scale to your users as they come there. These are business critical applications, so you want to make sure they're always up. So this stack's going to set you up for success there. And then a key thing about Next.js, particularly if you compare it against other frameworks, is developer velocity. And I'm just going to put kind of also in maybe unwritten parentheses, like just joy. Developers love building in Next.js. We really do strive to provide a great experience for engineers that are shipping with these applications. So we hope that you're moving quickly, but also adapting easily to changes in the ecosystem. And then last but not least, we have an enterprise commerce backend with Salesforce. So you have all the omni-channel, multi-brand capabilities of the Salesforce ecosystem and everything else that it has to provide there. So with that, let me talk a little bit more in detail about Next.js. I mean, I see that a lot of people are using other frameworks for ecom other than Next.js. So I think it might be good just to kind of level set around the opportunity I think there is to capture when you use a framework like Next. So what Next.js is it's a React framework. It's the most popular React framework in the world. It's some of the largest companies in the world are using Next.js to ship their business critical websites and web applications. And what's great about Next.js is, well, a lot, but if you're going to take away some of the main bullets is one, it's open source. It's been open source since 2016. And we've really captured the mind share of the React community to contribute cutting edge and best practices or cutting edge features and best practices from this ecosystem into one framework where you can leverage this for your application today. With this comes a lot of functionality. So Next has support for client and server-side rendering. It has support for React server components and streaming, which is moving more to these progressive features that are great for these fast dynamic applications. But then it provides you routing functionality and middleware, which is going to just arm you with different tools so that when you have a business requirement comes up and you want to be able to do something special for a set of users or a particular use case, you have all these tools at your disposal to do it the right way. So that's Next at a high level, but again, this is a great ecosystem to be part of. So a lot of people are shipping Next, over 13 million npm downloads a week. we're at over a million monthly active developers. So when you're using Next, again, you have this huge repository of tools, but also a huge community of resources for you to tap, like what we're going to show you in a little bit. So I see that real quick. I see there's a question around the GitHub repo. I'm going to send a repo link in a sec when we get to the walkthrough. So we'll share it in a second. And then John, I'm curious for your kind of like why Salesforce Commerce Cloud and a solution like this, and your expertise on this topic.
Yeah, it's always tough coming after the next slide to do the Salesforce Commerce Cloud pitch because in contrast, Salesforce can seem a bit sort of big and uninteresting. Um, and in many ways, that's kind of the point about Commerce Cloud and its appeal. Um, it's reliable, connectable, adaptable, customizable. It's built for enterprises and it's tested over a large number of years. So its sort of safeness is its strength. The time it's been around is a positive quality. The image that I try to sort of throw in people's minds, I'm not sure it always lands, but like think of it as a reverse mullet. So a mullet, for those who perhaps aren't sure what a mullet is and didn't have never had the joy of seeing a mullet hair, it's like a haircut. And what you say about that, it's traditionally um, short on top and then long at the back, right? They say uh, business at the back, party at the front. No, that's the wrong way around for the mullet, isn't it? Business up front, party at the back. And Salesforce plus Next is kind of the reverse of that. It's the sort of party on the front end and business on the back. And Salesforce is the business on the back. It's straight, neatly cut, tidy around the ears. And Next is this sort of big, beautiful, bouffant, hairsprayed, exciting thing going on at the front. And it's that combination that I think is the winning ticket for um, big commerce customers going forward in particular, but I think actually Salesforce customers at every scale, that all of the enterprise stuff that goes with Salesforce, its reliability and its flexibility, but with the opportunity in a composable Salesforce world to use the toys that everybody else gets to play with, the headless search, the headless CMS, and in this case, in particular, Vercel and Next, which is a strong argument, a strong top to put on top of a Salesforce site. I mean, there are some issues around here that are worth thinking about too. So multi-brand is important, and multi-locale. That can start getting expensive on some of the more mainstream, sort of small and medium platforms. That can get expensive. And customization is a strength. You really can do a great deal. You really can stretch outwards on Salesforce and do more than you can always do on some of the frameworks that want to sort of keep you a bit narrower and having the same thing in common. So don't leave here thinking Salesforce is going to make you run to the rooftop and shout about the joys of Salesforce Commerce Cloud. But in a way, that's the point. It's that very safeness that makes Salesforce such a great option in an environment where it's possible to bolt on all the exciting things.
Yeah, what I like about, well, one, I love the reverse mullet analogy, but also what resonates with me about this is, particularly around the holiday seasons, what we really look for at Vercel is like a boring holiday season for our e-commerce customers. Like you should have traffic coming to your site, a lot of it, and it should be relatively boring. Like site's not down, site's up, you're generating revenue, it's predictable. That's what we want to see. And I think the the reverse mullet analogy is like perfect for this. Building an exciting experience on the front end, but on the e-commerce side is absolutely critical that everything is fairly stable, robust, and predictable. Um, yeah, so John, I think one of the things I like most about having this session with you is also being able to just have like a practitioner here that is just super experienced in the stack, that can speak to like examples of success and what you've seen maybe in on even on the kind of like friction that you've encountered with some of these solutions. So what tips and considerations do you have for the attendees today that they can maybe put into practice on their solutions?
Okay, so some things to think about and some things that you'll discover as you do these kinds of projects that we wish we'd known in advance, and some of the things that really do make Vercel shine. Um, so number one, when thinking about this, API skills matter. So it's all very well having a front end team that get overexcited about Next and all the amazing things there. But you've really got to be able to wield Salesforce's back end skillfully to be able to execute on Next properly. And I'll put it in the words of, I asked all our engineers to contribute to this slide. So some of this is stolen and quoted from them, but their quote on this was properly implementing SSR and client server hydration, partial pre-rendering and caching strategies require not only Next expertise, but Salesforce API expertise too. So it's not that, oh, you can't do it with the APIs from Salesforce. You can. They're kind of the original gangster of commerce APIs. But don't underestimate the degree to which you're going to have to be skilled in wielding them. Second point, think through your team composition on a project. What we've found is that there's quite a steep learning curve for junior developers. You kind of have to know the whole framework and have a big picture idea of how it all works to be able to be effective in Next and Vercel. But what you'll find is the senior guys will go up that curve very quickly and keep loving it and loving it and loving it. So it's don't put two juniors over in a corner on it to see what they can come up with. Make sure you commit to putting your senior guys on it. So people talk about agility a lot, and number three is kind of about that, but it's a warning, really. Oh, that's probably overstating it, but you've got to be able to keep up with Vercel. Um, People, if you go into Vercel land thinking that it's like Salesforce land, where it moves kind of slowly, it innovates kind of slowly, it's strong, safe, effective, all of those good things, but relatively slow to move forward. Vercel is going to seem very fast. Things change quickly. There are things in version to version that you have to go back and work with. You have to pay attention to how it changes. It's not a set and forget technology. Now that's a good thing because it's everything. It's the innovative part of Vercel and why you choose it. But it's worth pointing out that that has some friction for you. You have to pay attention. You have to keep up. You have to commit to it. I would say that the way that you architect the experience, and this is number four, is important because you will probably know more about how Salesforce and e-commerce works than most of the engineering team at Vercel will. Not because they're incredibly smart people, they are, but because if this has been your bread and butter for a period of years, then the bodies that are buried around Salesforce are much more familiar to you than they will be to the people that design Next and Vercel. So there are elements and parts of this where you've really got to understand and link the user experience architecture and the customization architecture so that SSR works properly, so that segments work properly, and so that you can build out an effective implementation of Vercel on top of Salesforce. I chucked this one in. It's not really Vercel specific, but it's a plea really just on headless projects and composable projects in general. Think about the CMS. I know this is a more technical audience and this is really aimed at you guys. It's tempting to think that the CMS is just some slots that are sort of dotted around the place that we can just leave a gap for and throw some stuff in at some point. The CMS design and architecture is a significant part of the benefit that internal users will get. Vercel operates brilliantly with headless CMSs, and I'm sure Alex has got some examples coming up. But if you're going to get agility from a project like this, you want to get a CMS in place that enables merchants to get off the IT docket and give you room to do your thing on Salesforce and enable them to do more and more of their thing. And a headless CMS is just the easiest way to get to that and kind of liberate everybody. So don't forget about a CMS in a Salesforce Plus for Sell build. Um,
Quick, John, quick question for you on this actually. Is
yeah.
there one in particular that, or a couple in particular on the CMS side that you've seen as like a good fit for the solution? I don't know if how tricky of a question this is for you.
It's not a tricky question at all, but it's definitely a partner hand grenade that you've rolled towards me with the pin pulled out of Alex. But I will happily throw myself on top of it. Um, so in Salesforce land, the CMS with the longest standing record of really operating in Salesforce is Amplience. And in any conversation about headless CMS in Salesforce land at all, Amplience needs to be in the conversation, doing amazing things, particularly around AI. So have to be in the conversation, and we've built multiple, I think 4, 5 sites with Amplience. Content stack super strong, have to be in the conversation as well. You can't have a serious conversation about who to use without content stack in there. Great workflow management, very enterprise friendly, really like content stack. We've built with Contentful, and it's a very good tool, but we have less experience. So I'm sort of not in quite as strong a position to judge. You can absolutely build the tooling you need, but it's got slightly less e-commerce experience. And one that I really like, but which we haven't built in, but I'm definitely looking for a project to get our hands dirty on is Storyblock. A lot of people who I trust talk about it in a very warm way, but we haven't managed to get a project doing that yet, so I can't speak with any authority on that one. And if I've
Sure.
left anybody out, then apologies for that.
Yeah, there's some conversation in the chat around CMS. Like we see Payload in the chat, and Payload's a great CMS to pair with Next.js specifically, kind of like this Next.js native um, um, CMS. And I'll just kind of highlight in general, like this is kind of the whole advantage of bringing Next.js. And while I'm curious for John's take here is like, I'm curious what has fit into Salesforce and kind of like well in the past, but also now that you're using this headless architecture, it really is it's up to you which one you want to bring in the expertise. Yeah,
I think,
Sandy, another
yeah,
great
no, that
great
uh,
story here.
here's the thing, and this may be you forcing me to dig an even deeper hole for myself here with all our partners, but the truth is that a headless CMS is a tool, and you choose a tool based on what it is that you're trying to achieve and do. And all of those that have been mentioned in the chat are all fit for purpose. There isn't one in there that you can honestly say that's a poor choice. Um, so the reason we try and limit it, and I don't know how many sort of partner teams there are on here, but we try to limit the choice when it comes to a client selection process around a project like this, because often clients are choosing Next for Sell and a CMS for their composable journey. Like we try to limit it to 2, possibly 3, because with more than that on the list, it's just an overwhelming amount of information. So I don't mean any disrespect for any of the CMSs that are mentioned there. They're all fit for purpose. What we've tended to focus on is and this is where I would focus if you were choosing one, frankly. If you have a partner who you love and work with a load of experience in Builder or Sanity, don't think that me saying Amplience is great makes any difference at all. If you've got a partner who can really make a CMS sing, that's probably as important as anything in your decision making. And I mean, that's true of Next too. I mean, if you've got a partner that knows Next in and out, then that should weigh quite heavily in a choice of front end framework. Yeah, good,
Yeah,
good.
absolutely. All right,
Um,
John, I cut you off. We can continue through
You did
the
no,
other
no, no.
tips
That's
if
fine.
you
It was a
want.
great cutout, and it's a really interesting and important question. And as technologists, we do sometimes sort of think that's content over here, and that we don't need to think about that. But the beauty of modern CMS is that it's a tool. You can build out what your internal clients need. you can make all of these do what you want it to do, and in experienced hands, all of them will do great things. Okay. Um, so I'm just going to quote this one because it's sort of, I think the phraseology and the slight geekiness of it sort of speaks for itself. So this is one of what the senior devs wrote me when I asked for feedback on what we should be saying here. He said, please don't underestimate the integration with Git and the built-in CI/CD process. It's plug and play, pointed at a branch, and it's configured. We've had to build our own systems for managed runtime, MRT, over the years. Day to day, this is the biggest impact. Okay, so that was one guy. And another guy says, with Vercel, every Git push triggers automatic deployments with preview environments that create unique URLs for testing. An infinite amount, exclamation mark. There's some pain behind that. No bundle management or manual deployment. CI/CD is built in. So you're going to hear a phrase, developer experience, I'm sure, from Alex at some point, and that's what developer experience is. It's the team themselves love a lot of the little touches that make their lives easier. So one of the things to think about and know is that this opens up a lot of time for the guys who work on front end and a lot of enthusiasm for doing things because you're not bogged down with some of the stuff that can hold you back in other circumstances. Now we've built tooling over time to fill in some of these gaps, but if you're not us and this is your first project, the amount of stuff that comes out of the box on Next and Vercel is absolutely worth having. Okay. Um, this one's I don't know if this counts as a tip or a consideration, but it's something I would say. So if you're on SFCC now, there are bodies buried in your code. There is technical debt there somewhere. You may well be considering upgrading to kind of skip past an SFRA upgrade. It's a very sensible use case for composable Salesforce. One of the interesting things we've seen executed well is seeing composable as a way to separate front and back end and then pay that debt off. So you get the agility out of a composable project, and particularly out of a next project where the front end is really cooking and you've got a headless CMS that you can kind of dig into Salesforce and start looking at doing things that may have been in your docket for the past 4 years but have never got around to. And if you're a new Salesforce customer, and I encourage you, particularly if you're on one of the legacy platforms nowadays, the sort of the Oracle, SAP, HCL types, and you're thinking about Salesforce, um, this is a great architecture. As I said, it's boring on the back end, glorious on the front. Um, but I would also say, and this is the self-serving part that you can throw some salt on, you need a great partner to execute composable projects like this, particularly one with experience in Next. There are others around, but I think if you get that right partner, you should prepare to be wowed by what you can achieve on Vercel and Salesforce.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate all these tips. I mean, and there's just a lot of learnings for me to have here. And I'd be curious, John, also like hand in hand with these tips. I'm assuming a lot of these came out from the work that your team did with us on Callaway Golf. So what about these tips facilitated, and what was there to highlight kind of about this engagement that's top of mind?
Okay. So just as a bit of context, so Callaway, great company, good people, um, old site gen sites, a bit slow in places, some cumbersome user experience. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Um, and really, this was an opportunity not just to sort of re-platform, but to rethink how they approached customers online. So they went full on, let's go next for sell. They got content stack in, fresh, and built it on top of what was a fairly long-standing Salesforce site gen backend. First project was Callaway Golf. That took 6 months, so full composable end to end took 6 months. The second brand they chose to do in their portfolio was Oggio. That took 10 weeks. So lots of benefit of sharing the components we built for the next infrastructure. They have a brand, Callaway Golf Pre-Owned, which is a completely separate data source, but because we could share so much of the front end was 12 weeks. And Topgolf, which was an idea that was kind of thrown at us pre-peak, that they've been trying to put a store on Topgolf, which they also own, like a mini store on it for quite a while, and we were able to put one on using a lot of the architecture and components that we'd built in the prior sites in 4 weeks, which it was unheard of for what they'd done before. So background was, and this is one of the takeaways I would have, is if you're multi-brand, um, the ability to share architecture between brands and to learn as you go along is you can say the word agility and it not mean much, but when you look at that kind of progress, it's super meaningful. Performance improvements. It's a lot easier to build a clean Salesforce build in Composable than it is to adapt a SiteGen site where you've really got to work with the APIs to get them to sort of squeeze out what it is that you want. But the performance improvements that we saw were fairly typical and they're the same pattern. So if anybody doesn't know how these make money, um, the main benefit of performance seems to be bounce rate. So you get about a 20 to 40% improvement in bounce rate, and engagement metrics that bump up by about the same amount. So time on site, depth, all of those kind of engagement metrics. Um, and what you see is that a proportion of that flows through all the way to conversion. It doesn't all make it there all at once, but you tend to see this sort of 20% number making its way through, particularly on mobile. So it makes a huge difference on mobile. Our theory is that the performance means that you never really distract the user from getting to the end. So it's the low propensity users who tend to sort of make it all the way through. Um, the I think one of the other hidden benefits that Callaway would speak to is that um, you really get an opportunity to develop internal skills at a pace of a company that's really moving the art and the craft forward at pace. And you're also now able to recruit into your team a bit more widely because it's not such a sort of closed ecosystem. The skills aren't sort of kept so narrow. So there are benefits commercially, which I've gone through. But I think really the benefit of a build like this comes over the long term as you sort of change the agility of the teams, give yourself the ability to grow and develop more quickly. And I think you see the benefits of these over the long term as well as the short.
Yeah, yeah, this makes a lot of sense and love seeing kind of like this ROI on this flip to Next.js. Though I will acknowledge the former consultant in me knows that there is probably some friction that happened with the teams there. And anytime you're switching a stack, there's a learning curve that you have to figure out and get your team to kind of come along to the journey with. What more can you say about kind of like the impact to the team in switching to a composable architecture like this?
So that's one of the things that surprised me most as we've done this over the last 2 or 3 years is the degree to which the amount of change I thought would have to come hasn't really been required. Like, I think there's a substantial gap between the skills it takes to build one of these sites and the skills it takes to support, maintain it, learn it, grow in confidence. So, like, Callaway's pretty typical. I mean, a fairly normal Salesforce customer. There's a long-suffering Salesforce engineer, super talented, capable. Hello, Phil, who knows where all the bodies are buried on the site, and mainly because he was forced to bury them. Um, and uh, I've been surprised the degree to which they haven't really had to grow their team substantially or change the skill set. They've expanded the team, so they brought some people on who are specialists. And I think that's one of the key changes. The guys that you've got that call themselves full stack but are really Salesforce engineers, they get to be Salesforce engineers, and the guys that you bring in to do the front end, they get to be front end engineers and really sing. I think the sort of pretense of full stack diminishes when you get composable, and you can get people who are really good at either side of that equation doing what they do. You know, what we've found is that We can usually walk away from customers if required within 2 to 6 weeks of a launch, and still have them move forward. Now, others we stay with because they really want to keep pushing on and keep the pace going. But one of the surprising things for me was the degree to which there's some change, but not anything like as much as you might imagine going from sort of Salesforce to full stack Salesforce to Next over here and Salesforce
Yeah.
there. So surprising.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would hope that in moving to Next, teams will find a larger pool of engineers that can help move the storefront further without necessarily needing to know like every detail of the entire stack. Um, but that's great insight for sure. Um, let's move on to some of the last kind of customers I want to highlight, and then we'll move into a more technical side of the workshop here. I see a lot of technical oriented questions, so we'll be getting to those. Some other Salesforce Next.js customers that we have that Vercel has that I just want to highlight, which I think are good examples of some return that you can get for a stack like this. One is Tapestry, which migrated many sites to Next.js and Vercel, and have had a great success improving their performance, which is obviously critical for conversion and revenue. And speaking of revenue, Under Armour, Vercel Next.js application, has been partnered with us over the last several holiday seasons, and this last season saw a 2% revenue lift with in their business because of a modernization to Next.js and improving their speed and their velocity. So 2%, not a big number, but when we're talking about revenues, this is a huge thing that the stack is driving. And last but not least, Logitech greatly improved their bounce rate and their conversion, moved to Next.js, and have also lifted revenue overall. So these are just kind of like a snapshot of some of the success that we see. We have plenty of other details in our case studies on Vercel.com, which we can send to folks. But yeah, let's do a change of gears here. Let's start talking about the architecture that we're going to arm you all with today. So I already had kind of like a high level of what the stack is, and this is just going a little bit deeper into what Next.js Commerce and Salesforce Commerce Cloud is. Now, I do want to level set. Like the goal here was to provide you all a template, a starter, a reference for you to use. But we fully expect that you're going to have to take this further or use it as a reference for an application that maybe you're already building. But we do want to provide a example that is using the latest version of Next with some of the more progressive features that you probably want to leverage on your store. So what this consists of and that you can leverage is first, there's obviously Next.js. So this is the front end framework. And some of the key features among the others that I called out earlier, but some of the key ones that you should keep an eye out for when you're using this application is the support that it has for React Server components, partial pre-rendering, and incremental static regeneration. So these are all, if you haven't heard these terms before, they may all be very confusing, but these are going to be the tools that you reach for to enable really fast and dynamic applications. So for example, PPR, the concept of partial pre-rendering is you probably have pages or sections of your site where content is fairly static. It doesn't change for any two users. The idea of partial pre-rendering is that you can actually statically render that that static content or that shell, if you want to think of it as a shell. You statically render it so it's super, super fast to show to the user. But then you define these holes in the shell using what's called a suspense boundary in React, which basically just annotates to the framework that, hey, we have this static shell, but we have some dynamic content or some dynamic functionality that we need to also display. And partial pre-rendering with React Server components is going to let you do that. So you have these really fast page loads, but with still dynamic content. So a good example is like maybe you're running a personalized or you're having a personalized component rendered to the user, or you're running an A/B test on a component that's on your page. You can use PPR to still show them a page very quickly, but then show them the component that's personalized for them. So that's it at a high level, but there's a lot more to dive into. And again, this is what Next.js is going to arm you with. What I'll show you in a sec when I deploy this application is I'm also going to deploy it to Vercel. Vercel is going to have all the infrastructure that you need to make sure this site is provisioned, scaled, and secure, so that your store remains fast and it remains up. So there's a lot of infrastructure under the hood that we'll be leveraging for this, and I'll show you how you can identify that in a couple minutes. And then, as we've been talking, this is a composable headless architecture. It's going to be integrated with Salesforce Commerce Cloud. How we did that for Next Commerce is that there's a lib directory that has Salesforce Commerce Cloud within it, and in that contains all the API calls to Salesforce. We're using the isomorphic SDK so that you can pull products and do your checkout experience. And then, while not part of this template, you can use this as a starting point for you to integrate any other service that you want. So we talked about CMS earlier, but there's plenty of other headless services that you can bring in depending on your requirements, and you're going to be set up for success here with a framework in an architecture like this. So this is the slide that I know some of you were asking for the link for the template. This is the QR code. We're also going to display this QR code up at the very end during the Q&A. So don't feel like you have to grab it right now. But this template is on vercel.com/templates. Again, this is a Next.js 15 app router template. And then what we wanted to do is provide you a good default application. So we're integrating with a kind of a default Salesforce sandbox, but then providing everything you need to see a end-to-end flow. So you're going to have a homepage, detail page, listing, search, as well as a custom checkout that is all built in so that you can do a full adding to cart and then paying for that product purchase. So with that said, I'm going to now show you how you can get started and actually deploy this to Vercel. So what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to log in to my into the business manager so we can just see, in fact, that this is a fairly standard Salesforce Commerce Cloud sandbox. Just authenticating really quick right here. So I'm logging in here, and again, we have a sandbox that we've seeded with Salesforce's like default store. So there's nothing really too different about this store that you would have otherwise. You're going to have your standard set of catalogs. So we have our reference architecture storefront catalog. And then we have the kind of like normal set of categories. I can, for instance, go into like the men's category and see that we have all these products already existing. So we haven't actually gone in here and changed any of the metadata, added any new products. This is all using kind of the normal product listing. The only thing that I'll call out that is different is that we did create a couple of categories that are hidden for the purpose of just showing like featured products on the homepage. So this is called out in the repository as well as a template page that when you set this up, just make sure that you create two of these categories so that you render it there. And then assign some products, obviously. So that's the main thing to know about for the Salesforce side. But then in terms of actually deploying this, what you can do to get started is, just in general, I recommend to any engineer or any front-end developer to go to vercel.com/templates. It's just an awesome repository of ways to get started with Next.js and Vercel. And there's a lot of different things to check out. So one, this is a great resource to have. But then next, we have the template itself. So this is the Next.js Commerce for Salesforce Commerce Cloud template, which I'll deploy in a second. I did include some resources and details on how to get started. So for example, you will need some environment variables to authenticate to Salesforce in order to pull product information. So that's called out here. I provided kind of a brief description of what these are, as well as link to some relevant Salesforce documentation so you know how to pull these values. So I'm not going to go through the full process of actually pulling those values. I've already kind of saved them, but just know you can reference this for getting started. And then to deploy, all you have to do is click deploy from this template. When you deploy for the very first time, it's going to ask to basically create a repository on your behalf. So I've already connected my GitHub account, but if you use a different Git provider, you could always connect to a different one. Again, I just happen to be connected to my GitHub right now. And I'm just going to give it a unique name. And I have a Vercel team that I'm specifying will be the home for this new site and this new project. So I'm going to go ahead and click create. This is creating that new repository on my behalf on GitHub. And then it's going to prompt me for the environment variables that it needs in order to run this app. So I'm just going to really quickly just paste in my environment variables that I have for my store. Should just take me a second here. And then some of these are required by Salesforce to connect, and then some of these, like the revalidation secret and site name, are more or less just kind of user defined for just facilitating some of the integration. So I'm going to click deploy, and I haven't talked too much about Vercel yet, but if you haven't used Vercel, Vercel is going to basically handle all the provisioning and scaling of our application for us. So what happens now is when I click deploy, Vercel stands up a build container of Vercel's infrastructure. It pulls down this new repository that we just created. It does an install of all dependencies for this project with Next.js, and then does a build. And then what happens after that is Vercel has this concept or follows this concept of framework defined infrastructure, where basically when you do a build on Vercel, Vercel is able to infer automatically without anyone having to be in the loop manually. It's able to infer exactly the infrastructure that has to be provisioned to host this application as effectively as possible. So this site is created and stood up without anyone having to do any work or configuration. And that's great for the purpose of showing you this demo right now, but this is also really great for when your site may have a surge of users and customers come to it, because Vercel has all the information that it needs to horizontally scale that application and meet the need that's required of it. And then also scale down when it's not under that load and make sure that you stay efficient. So that's at a very high level and very quickly what Vercel did for us here. It's deployed this new application. I can go to my dashboard and see this new project on Vercel, administer it as I see fit. One thing that I like to do, which is probably because I'm an engineer myself, is I always like to sometimes take a peek at my deployments and just see. I'm always kind of curious, like what was the actual infrastructure that was created here? And for a given deployment, you can go to your deployment summary and you can see the relevant infrastructure. So you can see that there is static storage used for a slew of different static assets, which are being stored now. There was a set of serverless compute or Vercel functions that was provisioned to enable certain endpoints and routes on our application. And what I was mentioning earlier around partial pre-rendering, we've created serverless functions to handle pre-rendering those functions. And you can see it's just basically calling out my sitemap of the different pages that we have. So nothing like too earth-shattering that I'd say is here, but I like to go here just to see kind of like a little bit what's under the hood and the runtime that's responsible for our application. But obviously, I think the most impactful thing about deploying this to Vercel on this call is like I can just click straight through to this application. We see that I have my storefront. These products are being pulled in from Salesforce Commerce Cloud. I can click on this Blazor and go through a full checkout flow. I'm just going to do it really quick for y'all so you can see the end-to-end flow. I'm just selecting a size. I'm adding to cart. And then I can flip over to checkout. And this is a custom checkout built into Next.js. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill this out. If I can type live here. I'm not going to pre-fill because I don't want to save anything. And then I think probably most obvious, this is all using just like a test payment for now, but you can easily dial this up. Whoops. You can easily flip this over if you were in production. Continue to payment. So test order is placed. We get the confirmation. Everything again is being driven through Salesforce's isomorphic SDK, which is documented in the provider. So this is all custom hooked up. You can leverage this today. Again, the idea here was to provide a reference for you and to obviously extend this further. So with that said, let me cut back over to the slides here and talk a little bit more about what it means to maybe take this further. So there's a lot of different ways that you can obviously extend this architecture. This was created as a headless foundation for you to see how you can use latest features of Next in an e-commerce Salesforce setting. But there's a lot of other tools, particularly on Vercel, that you can leverage to make this more catered towards your business requirements. So I wanted to pull up this slide and just kind of like annotate clearly like the different offerings that are here at Vercel for you to leverage. So one, we are referring to Vercel here as an AI developer cloud, because one top of mind thing that you may be getting requests for or requirements around would be integrating AI into your storefront, having an agent integrated. And Vercel is a great place to be to build these integrations as well as ship them. So, for example, Vercel obviously built Next.js, an open source solution for building your front end, but we have many other open source tools that you can leverage for building AI experiences and really rich experiences. So, for example, another open source tool is the AI SDK. Basically, this is a toolkit that you can use to build an AI or an agent workflow in your shop or in your storefront extremely fast and get that integrated. And then we have tools like V0, which can help you ideate and get to launch much quicker than you could before. And then, as John noted, it's impossible to do a Vercel event without talking about developer experience. And Vercel's developer experience platform is all catered around making sure that your teams have what they need to collaborate and ship effectively. So we saw a very brief kind of example of a deployment just now on Vercel, but one great thing about Vercel is that every single commit that you have in your repository will result in a preview deployment, which you can think of as being like an environment just for that change. That environment can be shared between any of your developers. Your developers or your stakeholders have access, can drop comments directly on that deployment or that environment. Those comments can go directly into your project management software so that you can burn down through your list of bugs or your feedback. And then you begin that cycle all over again when you have the next version that goes out. So this is one example of the developer experience platform and what it can enable, but there's a lot more to Vercel around how it can facilitate this quick or this accelerated developer velocity. And then I already kind of voiced it over, but the managed infrastructure side of Vercel, I can't overstate. It's great. Whenever you have an application that goes to Vercel, it's going to automatically be scaled to meet the needs of the number of users coming to your site. But there's also a web application firewall, a very or a globally available edge network with the CDN functionality that you've probably require on your storefront, and it's all secure by default. So one way to go further is obviously using Vercel. John, I'm curious. It doesn't have to be in the scope of Vercel, but what are some top of mind things that you think about when you're taking a customer, maybe from a starting point to a more, I don't know, robust or curated storefront in the future that your team does?
Um, I think one of the challenges is managing the development of the team and like there's a sort of burst of excitement and a sort of liberation surge, um, but staying the course on any of these changes, if you really want to get value out of it, you have to keep the work going. Like when we don't do support, we have a phase we call momentum. And like one of the things to remember is like you don't build this project and stop. You have to keep the momentum of it going. You have to keep the team growing. You've got to keep pushing as hard as you can to get as much juice out of what's being provided for you. And I think that the key element on a journey is don't think, oh, we've built it for you, let's take a sigh of relief and sort of back off, because this is going to keep moving forward and changing. Like we've been on projects like I think I mentioned it in one of the answers to the questions, that like the partial re-rendering, which you were talking about, um, I don't think that was available during Callaway, and it caused us some headaches around how we sort of dealt with caches, particularly where there were sort of customer groups and a mix of those sorts of things. And whoosh, like by the end of the project, Vercel had addressed it and solved it. So it moves fast, and you need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good segue to talk about just like the last thing. So this is the last slide. We wanted to just kind of get the last notes for you to keep in mind, both on taking it further, but also just getting started. So to start, I think one of the themes today that we want you all to take away from is that this template, the information that you have today is really about making sure that you have great developer velocity, but also agility, and that you, on an ongoing basis, kind of embrace the change that happens in this ecosystem that I think Vercel is going to arm you with the right tools to take advantage of. And then I have a new favorite analogy from this workshop which is the reverse mullet. John, anything else you want to say on this note
Well,
for attendees to take away?
I'm impressed that you were able to get an icon for a reverse mullet, Alex. That's service above and beyond to a metaphor. Um, no, that would be. I think that is one of the critical. If you are thinking about Salesforce and Vercel, that reverse mullet idea of business at the back, party on the front end is the right way to think about why this is a good stack. So yeah, if I'll definitely get a t-shirt made with that icon on it if you'll send it to me, Alex. But yeah, I think that's
Absolutely.
a critical part of how to think about why this is a good stack overall.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, it's kind of more towards the boring side, but performance and scalability absolutely critical. I think we're arriving at a conclusion here, which is Vercel Salesforce provides everything you need to be fast, but also have this the resiliency that should be fairly boring for your operations as your users are coming to the site. And then also just the last point, critical to have experts in the room building out your architecture. Speaking for Vercel, I think we're pretty definitively the experts on the front end. So using Next, using our tool stack, I think is great for having a solution that's really using the best practices. And Jen, I think you and the team at 64 Labs have clearly demonstrated that there's a lot of expertise on the Salesforce side that you can accommodate.
Yeah, and it is important to have a partner that understands both. And obviously, I would recommend 64 Labs. That's my job, but there are others. But don't underestimate the gap between putting one of these together and then supporting it, developing momentum with it, and getting skilled in it yourself. That you really do want that expertise in the room. Vercel are great at supporting you through that journey, but you want a solid implementer who's done it before to guide you along the way. And I can give you the name of one if you'd like one, Alex.
Perfect. So I know we're reaching time here, but quick poll for the room. If you'd like to speak more to us or John around Salesforce Commerce Cloud and Next.js, please say so in the poll that we just put up. And then last but not least, we've arrived at the Q&A. I know we're a little bit tight on time here, but just a last snapshot of our content information. So you have my info, John's info, as well as QR codes. If you'd like to take a look at the template, here's another link, as well as we have a dedicated Salesforce Commerce Cloud landing page if you'd like to read more about the partnership and the relationship that we have together. But otherwise, we'll leave this up for a moment while we answer some questions. I know we've addressed a couple as we've gone through. Um, One that I see in the chat, how can Designer be retrofitted into Next.js front ends? I always love to give control of every page to the content team. Yeah, this is a great question and one that I had to work through in building the template. So right now the template doesn't integrate with Page Designer. I don't see any reason why it couldn't. You could pull the content as you see fit. I will say you will probably need to do some work to get the content so that it can be rendered within Next.js. So there's net new integration work to do that. My decision during the process of creating this template was to not be too opinionated on the content side because I figured there's also a good use case where you might want to bring a separate CMS into the integration. So I could go either way, but that's basically where it stands right now. But there's no reason I don't see why you couldn't, headless fashion, bring in that content.
Yeah, I'd agree with
Yes.
that. It's totally viable to use. It didn't have a roadmap to even be headless when we built our first PWA site and PWA kit. So it's a bit behind, but they are putting a decent amount of resourcing now into trying to get Page Designer to be a more viable. So I think you might find it's easier to answer that question in 6 months than maybe it is now, but it's a good question.
Yeah. A couple other questions here, or one comment around certification. Yeah, we hope to have an update soon on certification options. Nothing quite more that I can say on that right now. If you want to pick up more resources on Next.js in general, definitely check out nextjs.com or nextjs.org/learn. We have a whole course that you can take that's on App Router, which would be a definite great companion to this template. And then we have some questions around accessibility compliance. So what I would say about accessibility is all of our templates we try to make with accessibility in mind. It is always kind of somewhat the responsibility of the implementation team to make sure it follows and meets the requirements that you want. So we think it's a good starting point. If you want to take it further, there's resources available in our docs on accessibility, but also definitely encourage you to check out a tool like v0.dev, where you can actually maybe scaffold up components using our Gen AI tool, and then instructing it to, think about the different accessibility compliance levels and everything else, and it can help get you started. Though I'm not saying it's a compliance or a accessibility tool, but it's a tool that can help you create net new components. And then how easy is it to set up CDN routing between SFCC and for sale for a hybrid storefront? I might need to know more about the definition for a hybrid storefront, though in
So
general, when I think it, sorry,
they
John, go
did. They
ahead.
did. It used to be somewhat problematic. It's a question that does come up. Again, it's an area that they've had to put work into. So there were issues around. I don't know if it was specifically CDM, but there were issues around how you bridge things and how you put things together. And all I know is that um, where we really used to keep away from hybrid storefront builds because we didn't feel the work involved in getting around all these problems was worth it. We've started taking them more seriously now and looking at them as viable for customers that sort of really do want to just do it in stages. So to answer the question, it's not easy, or it wasn't easy. Um, I guess we're about to find out if it's become easier, and the some of the I think it was authentication issues that were quite challenging
Okay.
back in the day.
Yeah, I'd say this is a definite good one where if you have a specific case for a customer, definitely tap our team, and we're happy to help out. We have a lot of complex storefronts on Vercel, which we can certainly find a solution for. So I think it's more a matter of just getting in contact. But I know there's probably many options, all very specific to the use case. That's all the questions that I see in the queue right now. But again, greatly appreciate everyone tuning in and following along with us. If there's any other feedback, again, please feel free to reach out, and then our team will do our best to make sure that any developments we have future sessions for. So thanks everyone, and thank you, John, for joining and participating in today's session.
It was a pleasure. Great working with you.